Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for the Q&A. We've just been watching Yes, and we are joined by Sally Potter, who's going to be in conversation with us for a little while, and then we are going to screen the music video for Black Mascara, which is one of the tracks on Sally's upcoming album, Pink Bikini. And then we're going to have a little chat about that and then open up for audience questions. Sound good? Yes, great, yeah. Ooh. Okay. So Sally, thank you for joining us. I guess my first question is actually how long has it been since you've watched the film, and like, was there a sort of returning to it for you, maybe spotting things that you'd not so much forgotten but just hadn't revisited for a while?
I haven't seen this film for at least 10 years, probably longer. And it was interesting for me to watch it. I found it provocative. I'd in a way forgotten how far I'd gone in the exploration of religious conflict and difference, and the relationship between sort of sexuality and God and numbers and closeness and distance and suffering and ecstasy and so on, all those polarities that are in it. But I also remembered, I started writing it the day after the events of 9/11, and when I felt, okay, this is the beginning now of a hate story, East and West, that's going to take us all over. I need to make a love story, East and West. I need to do something, just a small gesture that's going to go in the opposite direction and allow all those difficulties and conflicts to be there, but by virtue of a sort of stream, a poetic stream, to find other ways of expressing what they are really, I guess.
Yeah. Is there something in writing and then rehearsing and filming something like this as events are unfolding that it maybe feels a bit prophetic, or even gives it an urgency that might induce like anxiety or like a thrill to sort of get things out there and like really respond? Well, there was a feeling of it, of the form of the film sort of emerging in the midst of this sort of maelstrom. And now that I look at it, certain parts of it do feel a bit prophetic. I mean, actually, the stuff about the virus. Yes. So I thought, oh my God, there were like little things that are kind of dropped in, that seem part of what's coming, So I did have that sense. I also understood by watching it just now why a lot of people at the time when it came out found it so difficult and provocative. When it was shown in the States, it was really it had a lot of very, very, very difficult responses, but like at the same time it was a huge hit in Istanbul. There were stills from it in Turkish Hello magazine. How do these contradictions exist? How does a piece of work travel or not travel? The biggest impediment that people talked about at the time was the verse, people speaking in verse, the non-naturalistic dialogue. But on the other hand, other people responded to that very well. So I don't know. Anyway, that's about critical response. My own response just now is, wow, that's bold. I could see that I'd gone really quite far. My favourite scene is the car park scene, where the underlying tensions about the struggle and about the male experience, racist experience of being unmanned within another culture that doesn't know anything about who and what you are and so on. I felt it's where the writing is at its clearest, and the two performances are wonderful. They were wonderful to work with, both of them, Joan Allen and Abkarian. But that's where I feel the core of the film is in that scene. And there is that moment where Joan Allen's character, she sort of turns, and instead of continuing with the argument, just sort of says, I hear you, tell me more. And it's almost palpable, that sort of inaudible exhale where it's like, finally, and I'm so worked up that I don't know what to say. And, people not even being able to pronounce my name. It's
kind of boils down to those small things. And I guess the subject of respect. And was there perhaps something in that dialogue as well, where it's coming to that realization that giving love is not like always giving respect. They don't always come as a package, and it's that relationship so easily slipped into coveting and enjoying each other as flesh, as they talk about a lot. So when Joan and Simone were together and rehearsing, was this something that developed as they were rehearsing, or intentional from the very beginning? Was it supposed to be much more something that was coming from both of them and turned into something that was very much about she coveting him in that way, and it not really going the other direction that much?
Well, it was in the writing. I mean, that was all written and intentional, but what it required was a very deep rehearsal process where we spent many long hours, where I would encourage each of them to, first of all, make an agreement to really listen without interruption to the other, and then to ask questions. Well, what's it been like for you being an American woman while there's the invasion of Iraq? You know, what's going on for you? Okay, listen. What's it been like for you as a female? Okay, now, what's it been like for you as Simone is in fact Armenian, but you know, he had a lot of the experiences in the film. He understands. What's it been like for you as a man? So real deep listening to each other. And then in the context of that, both of them were weeping like crazy. Then I was weeping. We were all weeping together then about the state of the world, what was going to happen, what was Islamophobia, and so on and so forth. So we all, I'd already, in a way, well, I generated the writing, but then they became deeply, deeply, deeply involved in the characters they were playing and in the tensions that they were expressing, and then some of the discussions we had, some of the things that got said, I then incorporated into the writing or would whiz away and write another verse to express it. And so it became a very wonderful process, actually. Yeah.
And I guess that element of listening and being listened to was so laced into even that process of rehearsing and writing, and then translates directly onto the screen, and that being one of the main themes. Was there anything in writing with iambic pentameter or and rhyming also that limited the way that you usually write a script, or did it kind of free it up in a way that when you're dealing with dialogue that's so emotional and so tied to people's feelings, as well as like fear, does the poetic sort of form actually free it up for you?
Well, it flows, and my feeling at the beginning, I'm not sure that I set out thinking, I think I'm going to write a script in verse. I think I started to write about the East-West situation and this, different relationships with God and belief and difference, and all the polarities that are in the film, and it came out poetically. It sort of came out in that rhythm of iambic pentameter, and I made a short pilot film of it to see would this hold up, and then decided that it did. It was worth pursuing, and then wrote the whole of the rest of it. And then it really is very, very strictly in iambic, although the meter often is broken in the middle and the other character finishes the line. But if you look at it on the page, it's an absolutely strict column of 10 syllables, a line, with rhyming. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if anyone felt like this also, but for me, when I'm watching it, I sort of dip in and out of that conscious acknowledgement that that's happening. Yeah. And it's kind of been made so natural. What was the process? Did you ever discuss what the process was like for Joan and Simone, kind of learning that? Because I think Joan once described it as being as near to Shakespeare as she'd ever do. Yeah. And it was Simone's first ever English language lead, and and that's what he got. So I don't know if you ever engaged in those kind of conversations, or if there were any kind of hurdles that you had to cross.
We talked all the time about such things, but actually they both said that they found it much easier to learn than many other scripts because of the rhythm, because of the rhyme, but most importantly because we went into what everything was about. They weren't ever reading it. They weren't never speaking by rote just because it happened to be in the script. It was like, where is this sentiment coming from? Why is this person feeling this? Why do they need to express themselves in that way? What are they holding back that they're thinking and not saying? And, all of that. So that finally it becomes actually through that analytical and sort of excavating process actually becomes very natural to say.
And for you, writing that way also, did you find that maybe you were writing more as a musician and a lyricist or a poet, or are they even mutually exclusive? Do they always feature together as being the director writing a script or writing a piece of music? Did this kind of shift in any other way?
Well, because I've always written the scripts that I've directed, I don't really know what the other thing's like. Interpreting something that somebody else has written, I've only done one adaptation, which was Orlando. Everything else is original scripts. And for me, the writing and the directing are inseparable parts of a whole. I often continue literally to write while we're shooting, but more to the point, I continue to write in a different sense during the edit. So the writing process never stops until it's the premiere, and even then sometimes I'll redo it. But
just for kicks.
Essentially, that's different. And then the music flows in a different way. I mean, in this instance, there's quite a lot of music written by other people. Philip Glass, Café Tacuba, and other luminous composers, but there's also quite a lot of what I thought of as sort of interconnecting musical tissue. For example, all the end music is that, and so finding a flow, an unmetered flow actually in the music that was newly written was an interesting process.
Because it's far more eclectic than perhaps some of the other soundtracks where they have that running theme. So that was really interesting to see, because a lot of the time the music seems to sort of replace, especially maybe in the case of Sam Neill's character, where he is so cold and yet finds all this expression when he's alone listening.
It's white man dancing, it's like air guitar and the fantasy of this self. I could have been John Lee Hooker kind of, but there's I hoped I wrote his character also with compassion, for the place that the blamed white man occupies as a very, very lonely place, and often unfair. So kind of carrying that responsibility and blame and the kind of sadness of that. So, and I discussed that a lot with Sam and with Joan as well. So it took a bit of persuading to get Sam Neill to do air guitar, but he knew where it was coming from. Yeah.
And so we've spoken a bit about like the Joan and Sam and Simone, but I also wanted to touch on Shirley Henderson's character as the cleaner, which is very interesting, and maybe even talk a little bit about the influences that kind of feature there, because maybe I would say for me, I know it's been likened to maybe like a Cassandra character before, or even as a sort of prophetess, but to me it seemed a little bit like a narrator out of like a Dylan Thomas or something, that's got a little less of that harbinger of fate and more of just I know the story but I don't know how it ends as much as you do. If you could just kind of touch upon like where the idea to have this omnipresent
the cleaners, the hidden army of women. There is this very peculiar thing. I don't know. Like at airports, I'm aware that there's this like ghost-like figures who are just sort of slowly cleaning, and they become invisible. People just don't see them, and just don't see the hidden army of working people all around us who are doing the things that nobody else really wants to do. And so I decided to elevate her, to think of her as the true philosopher, the only one who's really thinking about the nature of existence and what's going on in her own way, through close observation of, if you like, the stains and detritus that we leave behind us for somebody else to take care of. So I was very in love with that character and with the idea of the cleaner as the philosopher. But of course, therefore, they keep recurring, these invisible, unthanked heroines amongst us who are cleaning up after all of us. The biggest compliment about that for me was when the film was screened at the Telluride Film Festival in the States, and I went into and stood at the back of one of the screenings in a very big space, and I saw that there was a cleaner who cleaned in between the screenings, in between the seats, standing nearby holding 2 black sacks of trash. And at the end of it, I turned to her and she was crying. And she came up to me and she said, it's the best film I've ever seen. And it was, she suddenly, there she was, And that for me was incredibly, really, really incredibly moving. Yeah.
And I guess another thing that's really interesting is the stream of thought. That's another sort of thing that runs through and isn't really pointed out much. But a lot of that thought happens almost an instance before sometimes somebody actually says what they're thinking. And I was wondering about, you've mentioned Joyce before, but I think also the film's title comes from the very last word in Ulysses. But also whether that also came from a Joyce influence, because there is that stream of consciousness also happening within Ulysses, and I was wondering if that was a little connection too.
Absolutely,
yes.
A connection,
okay.
A very conscious connection. And I felt that if I could to find a way of taking the notion of the stream of consciousness, find words for it, get people to speak it in some degree, and have it as a river running through, a river of consciousness running through the whole thing. And one of the pieces that keeps recurring by Philip Glass is called Para River, and is homage to a river in the Amazon. So that feeling of a river of consciousness, and to take the last word of James Joyce's Ulysses, Molly's monologue. I read and reread Molly's monologue at the end of Ulysses as a sort of inspiration, or as a kind of teaching, really, for what I might hope I could begin to do differently. And the auntie's monologue is related to that. And of course, it's the link with Ireland, the twin cities of conflict, Beirut and Belfast, and the sort of the Irish link through there with Joyce. So yes, absolutely, I was aware of it. I didn't know that anyone would ever necessarily notice it or be aware of it, and it didn't matter. But for me, it was a very strong private connection.
It felt like it wanted to be noticed, I think, which is nice. So we spoke a little bit before about the way that you put together the soundtrack, but it'd be really nice to come back to that, because I think in a lot of the songs were either written or sung, or even I think mixed by yourself and Fred Frith, who also features on Pink Bikini. So there's again with this film there's a reoccurring collaboration with him, and also I think Alexei Erodian on the
shot it
again,
who also shot Orlando.
And I think in this there is
the party
with Alexei on one hand. It's that with this one there was a really strong sense of surveillance in two ways, because there's the non-invasive one that you do get from the cleaners and from people observing each other with handheld cameras and at weddings, and then the door cams and the CCTV and this other element. And I know that you've described the way that he works before as being kind of old school, and with portrait lighting and experimenting with editing. So I wonder if what the collaboration was like in kind of introducing these new elements to what he usually does.
Well, the wonderful thing about working with Alexei is that his training in the Russian School of Cinematography was a training about working shoulder to shoulder incredibly closely with the director based on and understanding the text. So it's very textual. So you spend hours with Alexei on each film, going through it. What does this mean? Why is this here? What are we doing? To find then a way of shooting that directly grows out of the material, is not imposed on it. So it's like anti-style, no style, just a function that is coming out of somewhere. And in this instance, so very differently than the way we shot Orlando, which came out of another way of looking and thinking. This one, which was shot on Super 16, was about different speeds of shooting, like 6 frames a second, 18 frames a second, 24 frames a second, or sometimes 60 frames a second. So slow and fast to somehow draw attention to, if you like, the relationship between moving film and a still. In other words, the cellular level of perception in film, echoing the theme of Joan's character, who is a scientist looking at the cellular level of existence, and of course the cleaner who's looking smaller than cells. So this thing of reducing the field of perception down to its elements, down to its details, its concrete details, just as in the car park scene, he says, from Elvis to Eminem, I know your songs, detail, concrete detail about how these things work.
And so similarly, working with Fred on the music, did you find, because I know when you were in conversation with Miranda yesterday, you were talking about the way that you sometimes collaborate with sort of recording yourself, and then the voice might be used, or Fred may convert it into a guitar. Was it a similar process here, or did you?
It was slightly different. There were, so the pieces, like the piece at the end over the credits, that was like about layering and getting Fred to layer different rippling sounds. So if I was in the studio with him, I might say, okay, this is in, let's say, A minor. And what I'm trying to find is a rippling, flowing kind of a sound. And he would go, do you mean like this? Diddly, diddly, diddly. And I would go, yes, but slow out. Diddly, diddly, diddly. And then layer over that. Diddly, 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 diddly. So we get the feeling. And so he would play me a bit of diddly, diddly, diddly. And we'd sort of build it up like that, record each layer. And then I would mix those together later. And then some of the other tracks that had already been recorded, like the wonderful Mexican group Cafe Tacuba, who were playing with the Kronos Quartet, the piece in Cuba, when you got that track along the Malecon, the front there, and you see a guy playing the trumpet sitting on the wall. Well, I got somebody come in and play trumpet over the Cafe Tacuba piece. So there's lots of layering and mixing going on of other sounds. So a kind to emphasize musically this uncomfortable fusion, because it's not a fusion film. It's not saying we can all get along just fine. It's saying we are different and we have these different experiences, but we need to listen to them, and we can, so to speak, play with each other's tunes. I don't know how else to put it.
It's that thing of it's like she says, that why do we fight to see who suffers most, when actually we're all here. And it's not about finding ways in which we're the same. It's celebrating how we're different, I guess.
We're different, but we can also join.
Yes.
So I tried to make it optimistic and hopeful at the end, in a situation which politically at that time, and indeed you could say now, was not hopeful at all. Yeah.
I think this is a very good time to show the Black Mascara video, seeing as we're on the topic of music. So we're going to get out of the way for a moment and show you this wonderful video, and then we're going to come back and have a chat.
black mascara makes your eyes open wider. Tempting fate, smelling danger, flirt with every fucking stranger. Every place a new adventure, play true and bend the rules. Those who don't are stupid fools, don't know what they're missing. Tongues mingle, wet kissing. Reading Camel, Jean-Paul Sartre. Existential disaster looming as I fall and fall from grace. Short skirt, black tights, wander in the streets at night. So exciting, but at home I'm fighting with my mom. I'm right, she's wrong. I cannot bear to see her long, to be young. She's 33, she has a teenage me to haunt her, often taunt her. Housewife, what a life. Meals and cleaning, where's the meaning? What can I do to never be like you? Pile on the black mascara. But I know one day I'll say, you gave me everything. At 14 life was hard, but oh, yours was so much harder.
I think maybe a nice way to kind of discuss this is, I know that you've described your experience of coming of age as a Greek tragedy, but another element that maybe struck me as being quite related to Yes was that this is also a kind of response to something that, as you said before, is reaching out to young women now, but speaking from your own experience. And did you feel that same urgency to respond to what you were seeing around you the same way that you felt with Yes?
Yes, because I've been observing partly through social media, but partly through some young women I've known and seen go through difficulties in their teenage years, and indeed burning memories of my own. The nature of some of those struggles. I did see an echo in Yes, actually, when the two adult women are talking about one of them feeling very undervalued as a mum, you know, and the other one's got a professional life, and that kind of division between women. And in this particular song, it's like the mean, rebellious teen who thinks that their mother is boring for doing a life of cooking and cleaning, but one day will realize that, you know, she gave her everything, gave her life. And that's how I feel about my mum. But I've seen that often, you know, conflict between mothers and daughters which is often about frustration, about the limits that their mothers seem to have accepted or even imposed upon themselves, or the thwarted lives and the suffering. And it's like the daughter doesn't want to see that, you know, the daughter wants to see a happy mother fulfilled and doing their thing. Certainly in my generation of mothers, that was very, very rarely the case.
And perhaps then do we see a little bit of that in Grace's character too? Because she's really reaching for that too, isn't she? And in that final moment where she does go to speak to her mum and she's not there, and having that sort of regret and crying. With Black Mascara, and I think also the album as a whole, do you think that there's room there to also view it as a score for a film that doesn't exist? Does it have that linear narrative?
Well, I think each individual song has a narrative shape. It's very few of them have a verse chorus structure. They start at the beginning and go all the way through like a poem. And then the story that's told is the transition really through all the teenage years and out the other end. So that itself is a story, but I never saw it as a score for a film. And in fact, I was very resistant to doing a music video at all. I wanted to be heard but not seen. So that was my solution. Turn my back to the camera and do the hula hoop instead.
It's quite eye-catching though, the hula hooping. So you would never really want to filter into that area of maybe scoring a film, do you think? Of scoring a film? That isn't yours.
Oh, that isn't mine?
Yeah.
I see.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, I'm kind of busy doing my own films.
That's true,
and then scoring them.
Yeah, that's true.
But occasionally I hear a score or a theme or something that somebody else has done, and I think, oh, that's interesting. Or particularly with a lot of the television series now, there's so much attention put on the thing that comes up at the beginning, and some of those scores are very, very, very well done. And so I kind of think, that might be interesting to do. But mostly I'm just working on other music projects anyway.
I think you mentioned the other day that there may be another album to follow, and then maybe even another one after that.
Yeah, I have a like two kind of half done one. This is kind of coming up behind, let's say.
Okay. Well, I'd like to open up the floor for any questions at this point. I think it's a nice place to see if anyone would like to ask Sally any questions about the film or the album or the music. Yes, hand in the back. Hello.
Hey, how are you? Hey,
Very good.
Yeah, really enjoyed the film. My question is, why now with Pink Bikini? You know, have you been accumulating music over the course of, your career, or I'm just curious as to, just how come now?
How come now? Well, I think, as you know, feature filmmaking is an arduous struggle to raise money, and it's a huge industrial process, even when it's a small, low-budget film. And each film has taken, in my life anyway, because I write them anyway, about 4 years. So it's a big, 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 long commitment. And I felt after doing the last film, The Road's Not Taken, which was then fell into a very difficult trap of being about to be world premiered the day before lockdown. So it was pulled worldwide after this gargantuan 4-year effort. I really thought, oh, Jesus. And suddenly the idea of a 3-minute song that I could do alone in my room, composed in the usual way, but using logic and everything, was fantastically appealing. But this is not new in my life. I've been working on music, on the scores of every film, sometimes more, sometimes less. In the case of The Road's Not Taken, it was entirely scored, written by me. But in my 20s, I was a singer and did a lot of improvised music and quite a lot of written music too. So it was something of a return. But it was not something I worked out intellectually to do now. It was more like I just was longing to do it. I was longing to do something as elemental, as apparently straightforward, as simple, as raw, and as bare as a song, as a sequence of songs. And that's really what sort of drove me. So it's probably a combination of timing with the virus, the fucking virus, but also because I'd written so much music for the last film, that I was really, really excited by what the Logic app was able to offer me to work musically in a different way, to really, really, really write and arrange in more detail, and was finding that very exciting. My desire hasn't extinguished my desire to make films. I have 2 films in development at the moment, but that's, I guess, why now. I also think there is a kind of ecology of sensibility. There's something about the fact that a song demands, in this instance, 1 minute, 38 seconds of your time. It's very no waste. And if it works for you, it works for you. And if it doesn't, you've only taken 1 minute, 38 seconds. It's not like, a film is very demanding. You have to turn up on a really beautiful sunny day, buy your ticket and sit there and, watch and concentrate and focus. And that's its glory, of course, as well. It's a monumental form. But I find it interesting to work at 2 ends of the scale spectrum in that way.
It's kind of a needed. I'm noticing there's I guess my question is, when did you notice that you had a penchant for writing and language? Because I'm noticing it in this song, kind of the eloquence of it. But I'm wondering, and in the film, it's to me it feels like quite a unique style. So I'm wondering, when did you first start to feel like you had this penchant for writing? Yeah. Just in your life.
For writing.
For writing?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, before I could write, actually, and before I could read, I can remember picking up books when I guess I must have been 2 or 3 or something, and I couldn't read yet. But I found them, they were so exciting to hold. I would turn the pages, pretending to read. I couldn't read yet. And I think I felt the same way as soon as I could write. So I have poems from, when I was, 5 or something. So I've written all my life, yeah.
Do we have any? We got a hand in the third row. And then we'll come to you.
Hi, it's great to be here. Great to see you. I love your films. I'm wondering a little bit about this, like the set design. I couldn't help noticing just how bare, that kitchen scene where there are no appliances and nothing on the walls. So I wonder if you could speak to that.
Okay, this is the great Carlos Conti, who I've worked with on 6, 7 films, I can't remember now. And he's a fabulous collaborative production designer. And so very similarly to what I was just saying about Alex Zay, the cinematic syntax, the visual syntax of the camera work had to come out of the purpose and function of the scene, not be layered on top of it. Similarly, the design, we would discuss this marriage. This marriage was bare and spare and lonely and clinical and so on. So we decided to strip, all the appliances, everything out of the kitchen and just have it be bare. And then the Christmas dinner scene, absolutely austere. And so that you sort of understood, even if maybe it was, you could perhaps say exaggerated, although I have seen environments like that. But you understood that this was her in a landscape. This was how she felt about her domestic situation. Therefore, her longing, in a way, for this other that was sort of more sensuous and richer in other ways, less money, but more. So all the design decisions came like that. And then, for example, we shot the Cuba scenes in a mixture of Cuba and the Dominican Republic for political reasons, because Joan couldn't go to Cuba as an American actress at that time. And but Carlos found the room and the color of the paint, those turquoise walls. It was all about, we talked a lot about blue, and she's wearing, this little blue thing. So all of those were conscious design decisions. And Carlos, I think, is a wonderful designer in that he never wants the design to dominate the scene. He wants to serve it. And often it's so subtle what he does that people don't even realize it's designed. They think it somehow came that way. No, it's Carlos. Brilliant person to work with.
I think, did you still have there's just someone in front there.
Hello, I think mine's probably just comments rather than questions. I'm not even going to try to veil them as questions. First of all, huge fan of your work. This is my first time saying yes, but I've seen Orlando so many times. I've read your script so many times. Your version is, apart from the book itself, it's the best version I've ever seen of Orlando. I guess to this film, first of all, this is the first time I've seen it, but I realize how contemporary, how relevant this is, because I just had a conversation with my friend. She's from Beirut. We're comparing. She told me she never speaks Arabic again in public since 9/11. I was comparing my experience, because I'm Chinese post-COVID, with her experience. And again, not trying to compare misery here, but some of those things are still very much so relevant. And the second is, I think we already discussed about the content, the form, how perfect they complement each other, and then they do draw attention as well. So I think that's like so much work has been put into the film, and you can definitely see it. I can definitely see it as an audience. And the third part is, I realized there's so much humor in this as well. Like the part the fire, supposedly the cremation, versus the fire sound in the oven, and the visit of the Santa versus the visit of the priest. So it's not a light topic, but there are so many touch in this, make it so subtle with so many layers, and worth to watch and rewatch through so many years. So thank you so much for your work. Thank you
very much for those comments. I wish actually there was a bit more humour in it, but it's a lot of sad subjects. I found that making this film and several other films which deal with tragedy, really, tragic global events, tragic divisions, tragic political events, and so on, it brought out a great appetite in me to work with sharper humour, which I did then with the film The Party, which uses sharp comedy, similarly to explore political and difficult realities, actually, but in a different way. It was very satisfying. But thank you.
We've got one more in the back.
Hi, again, echoing huge thanks for all your work. How do you balance all your different amazing creativity? Do you find that the writing bubbles up, or the dance bubbles up, or music bubbles up in you, or are you dictating around a film, the structure is, now I need to do the music, or do you find it takes you over?
You mean procedurally?
Yes, just literally.
Which thing do I do when? I pretty much make a point of not working on a film, not working with the music until long, deep into the edit. Best not to use temporary music because it makes everything sound good, better than it is. It disguises everything. So I keep everything looking and sounding as bad as it possibly can for as long as possible, because it teaches you what still needs work, what needs refining. Then when the music comes in, it's not necessary, it shouldn't be then to be propping something up or making a nice atmosphere or something, but because it's really adding a whole other layer to something which already works. Or maybe one doesn't need it at all, in which case cut it out. I've often, on The Road's Not Taken, I wrote a huge amount of music that I didn't use at all in the end. I just cut it out. So sequentially, that's what I do in the cutting room. Does stuff bubble up? No, I think I'm very, script writing for me is all about discipline. It just start it, and I don't know where exactly it's going, maybe at the beginning, but all I know is that if I turn up at the desk, work for a certain number of hours every single day, eventually there'll be a script. And I just have to keep remembering that during the times where nothing seems to be happening, or it's not going anywhere, it's not developing. So for me, it's all about discipline and good habit. That's entirely the answer about writing. And then when it moves into the shooting phase, it's a whole other situation. It's a sprint in the middle of a long-term writing marathon, really. And it's populated by people and collaborations. And then in the cutting room, late in the cutting room process, which is again very intimate and reflective, then comes the moment for music to come in. So completely different than making an album, for example, which starts with sitting down at the piano.
Nice. Do we have time for more? We do. Great. Perfect.
Hi there. I found it a very emotional film, and it was very epic. It took us on a real journey. And I just wanted to ask about the movement in it as well, because the cinematography, the way it was shot and the way it was edited, all felt like a dance as well. But there were particular moments where both of the leads were very symmetrical in terms of they were echoing each other's or mirroring each other's sort of like movements or postures. And I was wondering whether that came about during a rehearsal process of you do a lot of talking, exploration of their feelings and everything, or whether that came about on set.
Both. The movement, yes, I think like probably all of the films that I do, there's a great deal of choreographic attention to movement. And the performers, there's, as well as all the talking work, there's a lot of physical work in preparation, and I seem to remember us talking about body language and mirroring, and this feeling of people melting into each other, or like cells dividing again, and you know, all of the images and the movements were sort of reflecting each other in that way. And yes, movement, incredibly important. Movement through time, movement through speech, movement through thought, movement in relationships, and movement of consciousness. Because at the beginning, you know, it could look just like a kind of sexual attraction situation, heavy flirting, bit of sexual harassment, you know, becomes a relationship, and there's real closeness and stuff. And then the cracks start to show, and the differences, and it all starts to go somewhere else than it appears to be at the beginning. And that's another kind of movement, a movement through different phases of a relationship, or through different kinds of awareness. Yeah.
Do we have any more? Can't see at the top. I think that might be it. Well, I might ask one then. I think. Do you? Maybe it's a bit off the cuff, but like, would you ever see yourself adapting something like Ulysses? Like Ulysses? Yeah. If you've done Virginia Woolf, would you take on James Joyce?
Well, I'm not sure I've done Virginia Woolf. I've done one book, but you know, that took 7 years.
Yeah,
it took 7 years of writing to adapt that one, and other people have tried valiantly with Ulysses, but I kind of think, I'm not sure I would do that. But I've how can I say?
Is there someone?
There's always a copy of Ulysses sitting on my table.
Yes.
Sometimes it's propping up my laptop. Sometimes I just pick it up and put it to my cheek. I hope something's going in by osmosis. Yeah. So I think things can be an influence, very much so, without necessarily it becoming an adaptation.
Great. Well, thank you. I think we're going to finish there. I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. And Sally, your album comes out on the 14th of July. Pink Bikini will be released. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's been wonderful.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.